nights in a long time, but she
I know.
comes on Sunday night. I don't know what her schedule is like during the week. If that has anything to do with it or not.
Hey, that's fine.
Okay, we're live.
Oh,
There we go.
Oh, sure I'm alive.
Do what?
I'm sure I'm alive.
What are you doing over there, not in my friend's picture?
He's got a
Oh.
board.
I thought
Chicken scratcher.
of all the questions I was expecting to be asked tonight, I thought that why I moved would be the most self-evident.
Well, I didn't think about that. So I got hit in the head last week, so I'm not too whooped.
Give her a little leeway, huh?
Yeah.
All right. Good evening.
Good evening.
There we go. This is our last book of the Minor Prophets, which is kind of ironic because this is the first book of the Minor Prophets, but we did this in like the most obscure way possible. But I regret nothing. So, in a way, I mean, I am glad that we're covering this last because we started with Haggai in May of 2022, so like almost 2 years ago, which is absolutely crazy because for me anyway, it does not seem like 2 years ago. But hopefully anyway, we've all learned and grown over that time. I mean, I know that I have. And so I think it's good that we're covering Hosea last, because if we started out right out the gate with Hosea, we might not have made it all the way through. I might have made it halfway through Hosea and then quit. So yeah, handout is a little bit different, especially when it comes to some of the background information, and really there's only a couple things that I mean, if you are writing stuff down, there's only a couple things that you need to write down for everything. But let's just jump right in and just cover, read the first two verses so then we can kind of jump in, because the background information is linked to the first two verses. So chapter 1, verse 1 of Hosea. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. When the Lord began to speak by Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, Go take yourself a wife of harlotry, and children of harlotry, for the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord. So, yeah, like I said, there's really only like a couple things that you need to write down, especially for the different kings that are listed here. So there's two main, there's always going to be more than two, but really there's like two main sources for dating the chronologies of the kings of Israel and Judah. And, we've kind of gone over this before. There was one, and it was sort of the only one for a while, and so it was sort of the standard. And another guy came out, and he, sometimes they differ, sometimes they agree. And when they do differ, it's never anything too terribly drastic. But he's sort of now the new standard, depending on who you ask. But I think it's good to include both of them so you have a very wide range of date. You can take the earliest possible date for their ascension and the latest possible date for their death. So for Uzziah, option 1, 783 BC to 742 BC. And this is the older scholar. His name is William Albright. That was his date that, again, was sort of the standard for quite a while. Then, came along a guy named Edwin Teal, or Thiel, I don't know, probably Teal. And he said it's 792 or 91 to 751 or 750. So, and then within that, this is where it gets weird with Teal, because he proposes that most of the kings anyway had sort of a co-rule with the king that came before them. Most of the time, co-ruling with your daddy. And so basically total rule would be like 792 to 750, but then within that is he was co-ruler with Amaziah from 792 until 768, 767, when he became the sole ruler of Judah. So, again, it gets a little more complicated with the second guy, but as long as you get that big date, that's really all that matters. Next up, we have Jotham. Albright's date is 742 to 735. Implied in this is that all of these dates are BC. So I probably won't end up saying that 100 times. And then Teal came along and he said, big date, 751, 750, somewhere in there, to 736, 735. So 751 to 735. Within that, he was co-ruler with Jotham from co-ruler with Uzziah from 751 until 740 or 739 when he became the sole ruler. But again, as long as you get that 751 to 735, that's really all that matters. Ahaz, okay? Albright thinks 744 to 728. 744 to 728. Teal says big date 736 to 715. And then again, co-ruling with Jotham from 736 or 735 until 732 or 731 when he became the sole ruler. Finally, for Judah at least, Hezekiah. Albright and Teal actually both agree pretty much. Start date of 715 or 716, going until 686 or 687 BC. So 716 to 787 BC, both sources actually agree. And then we have Jeroboam of the north, and we're back to disagreement. So we have Albright who thinks 786 to 746, 786 to 746, and Teal says big date is 793 to 753. Co-ruling with Jehoash, from 793 to 782. And then at 782, he became sole ruler until 753. So that was a lot of dates and a lot of different possible dates. But that kind of gives you the time frame, at least, for Hosea's prophetic ministry, at least, Hosea's life, at least. And there's a little bit of an overlap. So I'm going to... and this is why, we kind of had to change up the format, is because for this first chapter, or most of the first chapter, I'm kind of just sort of taking, okay, here's one view, here's another view, and just sort of throwing them both out and saying, here's what they say, here's what they believe, here's why they believe it, and make of that what you will. I'm not going to say this is what I believe because I don't really know. And I'm not going to tell you this is what you have to believe. You can make of all this what you will. And so, two primary, sources that I was using was the Word Biblical Commentary, which was primarily authored by a guy named Douglas Stewart, and the New American Commentary, primarily authored by a guy named Duane Garrett. So, all that is to say, we're sort of pitting these two against each other. You can make of this what you will. Stewart, writing for the Word Biblical, talking about the overlap between the kings, and specifically, why is there not a complete overlap between the southern kings and then the one northern king listed. Why is there sort of a gap there? Why aren't there more northern kings listed? He writes and he says, since many of Hosea's prophecies can be dated confidently after 753, it would seem that the mention of a single northern king is in fact a token, right? So like in movies, they have like a token character, same concept. The compiling of Hosea's oracles was probably completed after 722 for an audience of Judeans who, like all Orthodox Israelites, including Hosea, recognized the sole legitimacy of the Davidic southern dynasty and had little interest in dating according to the defunct northerners. He also adds, he says, the rapid changes in leadership in the north after Jeroboam II's death might have been confusing to many southerners of the era after Samaria's fall and were probably ignorable by Hosea, the writer of 1:1. So basically, Stewart says it's just a southern focus. There's a southern focus, and because of that, the Southerners would have little interest in. They would have little interest in dating things according to, as he calls it, the defunct Northerners, and also, right, it would have been, like he said, confusing because of the, every couple of years we get a new king kind of thing. Garrett, who writes for the New American, he says, quote, the strange thing about the chronology that verse 1 provides is that the reigns of the kings do not fully overlap. This might not be surprising if Hosea had been a prophet to the kingdom of Judah, but his message was for the northern kingdom. Why did Hosea neglect to mention the rest of the kings of Israel? First, he regarded Jeroboam II as the last king of Israel with any shred of legitimacy. Second, he hoped for better things from Judah. So kind of the same thing that Stewart is saying, and it's not really until we get into like the later stuff that you're going to see, significant disagreement between these two authors. But basically, Stewart says it's a southern focus. That's why it only shows one king. Garrett says pretty similar, and he says Jeroboam II was really the last legitimate king in the north, and so that's why he's the only one given. So there are some general questions regarding Gomer, and this is still kind of falling into background information because part of this does come up in like verse 2, but some of it also has to do with like the narrative account of chapter 3. So we're just sort of generally getting these out of the way, and I will just give these to you right off the bat. So the first question is, are the wives of chapter 1 and chapter 3 the same person? So like you have chapter 1 where it name drops Gomer in verse 3. So Hosea went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And then in chapter 3, it says, go again, love a woman who is loved by a lover and is committing adultery, just like the love of the Lord for the children of Israel who look to other gods and love the raisin cakes of the pagans. So Gomer isn't name dropped, and because of that, there's this question over, is it the same person or not? Second question regarding Gomer is, was Gomer already a prostitute by the time Hosea married her? So those are your two questions. And that's really, if you just write those down, you can kind of get the basic gist of, where this is going. And then as far as answering those questions, Stewart writes that there is no data in chapter 3 to prove that Gomer is to be identified with the promiscuous wife, as has often been suggested. So Stewart, I guess you could call it the traditional view, although depending on how far back you want to trace that, might be not the best thing to call it. But for simplicity's sake, questioning the traditional view, Stewart says they're not the same woman, or at the very least, you can't prove that they're the same woman. Garrett, on the other hand, taking the very traditional view, He argues that the two women, the woman in chapter 1 named Gomer and the woman in chapter 3 are the same. He writes, Gomer is the only immoral woman we know anything about in the book. Obviously, he's not implying that Gomer is the only immoral woman in Israel, but it would be weird for there not to be a name, and then we already have this name of Gomer, who is a promiscuous woman or a prostitute. It would be weird for us not to immediately jump back to chapter 1. Gomer's the only immoral woman we know anything about in the book, and he argues that he says the word again in 3:1 implies continuity. And he even says that there's a question over whether the word again in 3:1 goes with the Lord or with go. So in other words, is it the Lord again said to me, go love a woman who is loved by lover, or the Lord said to me, go again, love a woman who is loved by a lover. And so if it's again love a woman, then you would have to love that woman a first time in order to love her again. Therefore, it would be Gomer is the same woman in chapter 3 as in chapter 1. As for the second question, was Gomer already a prostitute when she married Hosea? Stewart says nothing is ever actually stated about Gomer's profession or fidelity. And he says the intriguing, this is all his words, not mine, the intriguing notion that Hosea married a prostitute at God's command is blunted by the fact that the marriage remained unconsummated. He's talking about chapter 3 here, by the way. That she is called a prostituting woman in 1:2 cannot be taken as a literal statement of her profession or practice. She is merely an Israelite, all of whom are prostitutes, as the verse implies, that is, all of whom have broken God's covenant. Garrett, again writing for the more traditional view, he says, for context, he sort of lists out other viewpoints, and then he gets here and he says, by process of elimination, we have arrived at an interpretation which asserts that Hosea, having been commanded to marry an immoral woman, took Gomer as his wife. After some time and the birth of 3 children, she abandoned him for other lovers, then apparently fell into destitution. Again, at God's direction, Hosea went after her, found her, redeemed her, and took her home. So he's saying it's just one straight continuous narrative from chapter 1 to chapter 3. Moving on, date of events. And again, we're not going to see a whole lot of differences here between both sides. Stewart writes, it would be reasonable to assume that Hosea married Gomer no later than 760 BC. So I would definitely write that down if you're the note-taking type. He married Gomer before 760 BC. And he says, this is because the divine message associated with that marriage and its children predicts the downfall of Jehu's dynasty, which occurred in 753 BC with the death of Jeroboam II. He says Hosea might not have taken his second wife from chapter 3 until after 730 BC, judging from the emphasis in that chapter on the impending exile and absence of kingship and cult. Although, at the end of all this, he admits no certain solution is possible. Big idea is he probably did marry Gomer sometime before 760 BC. Because, we do know historically roundabout when Jehu's dynasty came to an end. Garrett, again representing the more historic view, he says, one cannot easily correlate any text in Hosea with any known event of history. He later goes on and he says, most of Hosea's extant messages come from the last 3 decades of Israel's history. So remember, the northern kingdom fell in 721, so we're dealing with basically anything pre-721 is what Garrett adds. And that makes a lot of sense. Although the inclusion of Hezekiah, and this is what Stewart says, means that possibly Hosea's ministry could have gone on after 721 and after the fall of the southern kingdom, although he says there's no oracle that's really able to be dated after 721. So for all, intents and purposes, date of events, he married Gomer before 760, and we're dealing with the last 3 decades of Israel's history pre-721, in all likelihood. Those are sort of your two, if you don't get anything else out of what I just said, at least take that away. As for the word prostitute, there's 3, numbers, numbered 1, 2, 3. An English lexicon of the Old Testament, it breaks down the usage of that word up into 3 categories. So, obviously, the first thing we think of when we think of prostitute is sexual immorality. So that's sort of your first category that this particular lexicon breaks it up into. And, it throws out a couple verses, but, you get the big idea. Anywhere in the Bible it's talking about sexual immorality, sexual prostitution. That is the idea. Second is international prostitution. And actually, the only reference given is in Nahum chapter 3, verse 4. And this is sort of the idea of like treason for your own, selling out your own country kind of a thing. The third category is religious prostitution. And obviously, regardless of whether or not Gomer was a prostitute by profession, elsewhere in Hosea, elsewhere in that same verse, it talks about Israel being a prostitute or Israel fornicating or whatever. Obviously, talking idolatry, religious. I'm really hungry right now. Religious idolatry. My stomach will not shut up, and it's driving me crazy. Okay, so you have sexual, you have national, and you have religious. And sexual and religious are the ones that we're dealing with in Hosea. The question then becomes, chapter 1, verse 2, which one are we dealing with when we're talking about Gomer? So again, we're going to pit Stuart representing, I guess, the not traditional view, although, like I said, you can go back relatively far and find people that would advocate something similar to what Stuart is saying. And then Garrett, who is advocating more the traditional view that, yes, she was legitimately a prostitute by profession. So first of all, Stuart, he says, Hosea employs the root, the Hebrew root word, literally to refer to actual prostitution only in one instance. And he points to chapter 4, verses 13 and 14. And we can just read those real quick. Chapter 4, starting in verse 13. He says, they offer sacrifices on the mountaintops and burn incense on the hills, under oaks, poplars, and terebinths, because their shade is good. Therefore your daughters commit harlotry, and your brides commit adultery. I will not punish your daughters when they commit harlotry, nor your brides when they commit adultery. For the men themselves go apart with harlots, and offer sacrifices with a ritual harlot. Therefore people who do not understand will be trampled. So, that is like pretty obviously talking about legitimate adultery, because sacrifices on mountaintops, burning incense, your daughters committing harlotry, your brides committing adultery. Just the language that's being used here, it's pretty clear what he's getting at. And so, when the scholar who argues that most of the instances of the word prostitute are metaphorical, when even he says this one instance is literal, there's probably something to that. So, we know off the bat, okay, that is like for sure talking about legitimate prostitution. But what does he say about the other instances? He says that the other references, they're more vague. And he points out that, the other uses of the word, and specifically verse 2, it's one, a slightly different version of just like the word prostitute. So the argument goes, if she was a prostitute, why wouldn't he just use the normal word for prostitute as opposed to the slightly different word? You can make of that argument what you will. That's just how it goes. Also, he argues that the other instances of the word prostitute are patterned after ancient Near Eastern treaty language. And so basically, God kind of uses this too with the covenant of, well, you've broken my covenant, so you committed adultery. And he says that's sort of the same language that Hosea uses here, and is very similar to like treaty language from the ancient Near East. He also says, right, well, again, it's a slightly separate word that's being used here in 1:2 than just the normal word for prostitute. And he says, this is an opinion, he says it can hardly mean prostitute. So, side A, side B, Garrett, he says Gomer was a literal prostitute, and he points to chapter 2, verse 4. So let's go to chapter 2, verse 4. I will not have mercy on her children, for they are the children of harlotry. Specifically verse 5. That's why I was confused. For their mother has played the harlot. She has conceived them. She who conceived them has behaved shamefully. For she said, I will go after my lovers, who give me bread and my water, who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my linen, my oil and my drink. So he argues that the wool, the linen, the oil, all of this is stuff that was used by legitimate vocational prostitutes of the time. So he says, well, the language here is, at least in chapter 2, is pointing to actual prostitution as a form of making money. Further, he says, there's nothing in the text to show that it shouldn't be read literally. So a lot of this boils down to, if you've ever seen a debate between an atheist and a Christian, let me rephrase that. If you've ever seen a not very good debate between an atheist and a Christian, you have the atheist who says, well, you cannot prove that God exists, which is true in a sense. We can't prove it that, there's not a photograph of God that we can show that says, here is God, or there's not something like that. In some sort of scientifically empirical sense, we cannot prove that God exists. And then the Christian will say, well, that is true, but you cannot prove that God doesn't exist, which is also true. We cannot empirically, scientifically prove that God does not exist. And that's kind of where we're at in terms of this. Nothing about the language proves that Hosea was a prostitute. True, fair enough. At the same time, nothing about the language can prove that that Gomer was not a prostitute. Fair enough. And Garrett will actually argue that there is evidence that this should be read literally and that Gomer should be regarded as a legitimate prostitute. He says this text doesn't resemble the vision accounts of other prophets. So one of the, this isn't quite the approach that Stewart is taking, but it's kind of related. One of the other ways to view this is that this is sort of a vision, like Zechariah and his 8 visions. This is all a vision that Hosea is having. And for maybe as weird as that sounds, I think that this was held by like John Calvin, who was a very educated man. So, this isn't just some sort of, you have to be a complete idiot to believe this. There are educated people who have held this in the point at certain times. But Garrett points out, he says that this doesn't resemble any other vision account of the minor prophets or just the prophets in general. And he also points out that there's way too many specific details about Hosea's home life and the birth of his children, and even the fact that they bring up how the second, and it's just way too specific for it to be a vision, or even for it to just be some sort of like metaphor or something. He argues against the idea that, well, Gomer really was Hosea's wife, but it's all just a metaphor for Israel's sin. And he argues against this by pointing back to Deuteronomy 22, where basically if you marry a woman and you find out she wasn't pure before marriage, you could bring all that before a judge and all that, and that would be dealt with. But if you just straight up lie, a woman who was pure before marriage, and you lie and you say, oh, she wasn't pure before marriage, and the father has proof that she was, then that could be brought into the court, the judge, whatever, and there would actually be a punishment doled out, not to the wife, obviously, but to the husband. And so basically what Garrett is getting at is, okay, well, if all of this is a metaphor and Gomer wasn't actually a prostitute by vocation, then Hosea is essentially lying about the sexual purity of his wife, which under the old law would have brought some pretty severe consequences for Hosea. So make of that what you will. Stewart's version of this sort of metaphorical view, it doesn't necessarily argue that Hosea was calling Gomer a prostitute by profession, but again, that his words, she is merely an Israelite of whom all are prostitutes, as the verse implies. So Stewart may or may not, by semantics, be able to get out from the Deuteronomy 22 argument. But I mean, that's basically where we're at. It's like for every argument that you would read and you would go, oh, okay, that makes sense, there's another argument on the exact same side that would also make you go, well, that also makes sense. All that said, like I said, I'm not really taking a side. I guess, like, gun to a head, make a decision. The literal reading makes more sense. I mean, yeah, it probably is that she was an actual prostitute, although obviously, I mean, the message is that the spiritual emphasis is that Israel has been unfaithful to God. Also, I think, yeah, it does make the most sense that Gomer is also the woman in chapter 3. But, there are implications. Obviously, I mean, the one that, like, anytime you go through the book of Hosea, people are going to bring up is, why would God command a guy to marry a prostitute? Which, we're not going to get into that. There's been too much written about that you can go peruse at your free time.
I don't want to interrupt you, but in this Bible it says, chapter 3 describes Hosea taking back his wife who had been rejected because of adultery. A rejection that was unjustifiable if Hosea had married a prostitute with full knowledge of her character.
Yeah. So, again.
So if he had known she was that way, he couldn't have rejected her because he knew what she was.
Yeah.
So
Gets intricate.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to read that. Read that one more time so I can process that.
Chapter 3, what?
Well, this is in the footnotes here.
Oh, okay.
You won't find it.
Okay.
That says, if chapter 3 describes Hosea taking back his wife who had been rejected because of adultery, a rejection that was unjustifiable if Hosea had married a prostitute with full knowledge of her character.
Okay, yeah.
If he knew what she was when he married her, then he couldn't have been justified in rejecting her for
Couldn't have
adultery.
criticized her in that. Yeah.
That was sort of
So he couldn't have. So to me, that kind of says maybe she wasn't a prostitute to begin with.
Yeah, that was sort of along the same lines of was Gomer a prostitute when she married Hosea is also, well, if she was, did, Hosea know about it? And, I mean, yeah, it's a rabbit trail that you could go down.
That's clearer to me.
Yeah. Okay,
Well,
so
it kind of fits the whole scenario because it's representing the spiritual condition of Israel, of Judah.
yeah. So anyway, let's get into the rest of. We're not covering the rest of the chapter. We're breaking at verse 9 because verse 10 does kind of start a new section. And I thought because that section runs into chapter 2, we'll just save it for next week. So 3 through 9. So he, Hosea, went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Then the Lord said to him, "Call his name Jezreel, for in a little while I will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu, and bring an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. It shall come to pass in that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." And she conceived and bore a daughter. Then God said to him, "Call her name Lo Ruhamah, for I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. Yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah, will save them by the Lord their God, and will not save them by the bow, nor by sword or battle, by horses or horsemen." Now when she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. And God said, "Call his name Lo Ami, for you are not my people, and I will not be your God." So, okay, there's three kids, 3 names. All of them are weird. Like all of these are, talk about the living sermon illustration thing that, we sort of dealt with in Zechariah. This is another example. So Jezreel. Jezreel is mentioned as something or someone who needs avenging, and also is mentioned as being a valley. So then the question is, okay, well, who or what is Jezreel? Literally, the name just means God sows, but it is a real valley. The story of Deborah and Barak, in the tent peg through the guy's skull. I mean, this is where that occurred. A lot of battles throughout the Old Testament occurred here. Like Megiddo, that whole thing. I mean, that's within this valley. So it's a valley, a lot of wars and a lot of bloodshed. But Jezreel, in addition to being the name of a valley, is also the name of a city within that valley. And the bloodshed in verse 4 and 5, it's specifically linked to Jehu. So before he became king, Jehoram ruled the northern kingdom. And 2 Kings chapter 9, it sort of tells the story of Jehu's rise to power. The prophet Elisha proclaimed Jehu to be the next king of Israel and even anointed him and said, imagine just getting anointed to be king, and this is what you hear. "You are to destroy the house of Ahab your master." That's all I was told. So he did. He went out and he killed Jehoram, who is a descendant of Ahab. And where he killed him was in the city of Jezreel. And after this, it says in 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 11, that Jehu killed everyone in Jezreel who remained in the house of Ahab, as well as all his chief men, all of his close friends, and all of his priests, leaving him no survivors. So you have the Ahab dynasty, him and his kid, his grandkid, all this. Jehu comes along, he just completely ends it. Ahab's dynasty is done, and the Jehu dynasty begins. And this is exactly where Hosea comes in, because the last ruler from the house of Jehu was Zechariah, and he only ruled for 6 months before, just like Jehu had done to Jehoram, Jehu's grandkid or whatever, Zechariah, he's killed by a dude named Shallum, who then takes the throne. So Jehu ends the line of Ahab, kills all of his family, all of his priests, all of this. He takes the throne. A new lineage, a new dynasty begins. And now there's sort of the prophecy that, okay, just as this happened, now also later on down the line, Jehu's dynasty is going to end and some dude's going to rise up and kill him. In pretty much the exact same way that Jehu killed Jehoram. And so, as I said before, this puts Hosea's prophecy to, it places it before this event. And so if Zechariah's rule is, I guess like earliest would be like 746 the earliest would be 753, then, we're before that in terms of when this prophecy was given. So the point of Hosea naming his child Jezreel is to prophesy the downfall of Jehu. So once again, God's saying, I will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu and bring an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. Now this directly goes into the next child that's named, which is Lo Ruhamah. And this literally translates out to no mercy or no compassion. It says, I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel. And then going on, yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah. So, what is the context? What is the context in which this is happening, and how does this relate back to Jehu and Jezreel and all of this stuff? Because, these are three separate kids, and in a sense, they're sort of three separate things, but they are also linked together. So, the focus for the second son and his weird name is the end of God's mercy on the northern kingdom. Well, the Jezreel Valley, it was sort of the beginning of the loss of, this is how Stewart writes it, the loss of independence at the hands of the Assyrians. In other words, right, when the Assyrians came in and they took the northern kingdom, it all kind of started in the valley of Jezreel, right? The guy who was sort of responsible for this, Tiglath-Pileser, he took a lot of the northern kingdom and sort of made Assyrian administrative capitals, administrative districts out of it, including one in, like I said earlier, the city of Megiddo, which is in the Jezreel Valley. And for a time, it was actually the capital of an Assyrian province. And then later on, it was just another administrative district. So the Jezreel Valley played an important part in the downfall of the northern kingdom. So, okay, you got a son named Jezreel, and his sort of, you got to feel bad for these kids in a way, because, it's one thing if you're a living sermon illustration, but, imagine your kid has to be a living sermon illustration, Welcome to class, what's your name? Oh, my name is not my people. My name is No Mercy, that kid had to have had a hard time. But the whole purpose of this living sermon illustration that these kids are sort of acting out, Jezreel, again, the downfall of the Jehu dynasty, and then Lo Ruhamah, or no mercy, no compassion. It's the downfall of the northern kingdom. Well, that began in the valley of Jezreel. So they are connected. Right. And God said, just as he would have no mercy on the north, he said that he would have mercy on the south. He would have mercy on Judah. It says he promised to save them, not by bow, sword, battle, or by horses or horsemen, but I, the Lord their God, will save them. And sure enough, right, the south fell to Assyria, but Assyria tried to take the north too. And they actually, we got into this before, but they actually did sort of surround Jerusalem at one point. But 2 Kings 19:35 and 36 record that night the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. And when the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. And it says that Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, he broke camp and he fled. And so, it's pretty much a direct fulfillment of this prophecy, because God did save them, and he did not save them by bow. He did not save them by sword. He did not save them by battle, by horses or horsemen. He just went in there and just killed them in their sleep. This is, in terms of like direct prophetic fulfillment, this is about as close as you get to like a one-to-one. So that's Lo Ruhama. And then finally you have Lo Ami, and this translates out to not my people. Hosea and Gomer, right? They have Jezreel, they have Lo Ruhama, and now they have Lo Ami. And this is sort of where we get into this. I'm not going to explain that. The word that's translated as God in verse 9. For you are not my people, and I will not be your God. It all ties back into the establishment of the covenant with Moses. And so you have the end of the Jehu dynasty, after which things only get progressively worse for the north. Then you have Lo Ruhama, the end of the northern kingdom. And then you have Lo Ami, not only the end in a physical sense, but also sort of, the same language that's used for the initiation of the covenant. Now God's saying, I used this language when I called you my people. Now I'm using the same language to say you're not my people. So all of these are sort of building off each other. But let's try to get into this, and I will try to make this as simplistic as possible. Right. The name of God that is sort of given in the Old Testament is just the verb I am, or a form of the verb I am, which when transliterated, which means basically you just one-to-one, okay, well, this is a Hebrew A, so I'm going to write that down as a Hebrew A, which just gives us basically in English garbledy-gook. It's not a word. When that's written out, you get Y, that's Hebrew Y, H, W, H, or Yahweh. And when you add vowels in, which we'll talk about in a second, you get Yahweh, Y-A-H-W-E-H. We probably at least are all familiar with that much at least. Right? And so, like I said, people will say, and this is kind of wrong, that Hebrew doesn't have vowels. They do, but they didn't have written vowels in ancient Hebrew. So this is like after Jesus. We're like way, way late to the game. You have this group called the Masoretes, or the Masoretes, and they come along and they want to put the vowels that were spoken, right? Because again, Hebrew had vowels when it was spoken, they just didn't write them down. They wanted to put these spoken vowels into the written Hebrew Bible. This is why there can be confusion as to how a word is supposed to be translated, is because the original manuscripts of Hebrew that we have don't have vowels. So, like, you can take the same root word and, it can have like 20 different meanings sometimes, and it all depends on what the vowels are that go along with it. But anyway, the Masoretes came along, and they're the ones that took us from YHWH to YAHWEH. And what they did is, for most words, right, the Torah was spoken, and it was memorized, right? And so it was very simple. The way that it was vocalized, the way it was said, is the vowels that they wrote down in when they were doing their version of the Hebrew Bible. The only problem was the name of God was never actually vocalized because it was considered holy. And so oftentimes they would either say Adonai or Elohim, which are more generic names for God, less personal names for God. And so what the Masoretes did is they took the vowels from Adonai and placed them into Yahweh. You're the Hebrew expert, so hopefully you know.
That's right.
Yeah, there we
They
go.
did.
So that's why we get YAHWEH. All of this is getting somewhere, I assure you. So the word in Hosea 1:9 that is used for God, I will not be your God. It's not YAHWEH, but it's actually transliterated out AHY. When the vowels are added, I won't explain why, but the A becomes an E and it becomes EHYEH. So Aya, something along those lines. And this is the same name for God used in Exodus 3:14. So the establishment of the covenant, also the burning bush narrative. So the establishment of the covenant, the word used is this. And that's the same word used in Hosea 9. And when the Masoretes came along, they even, it's not only the same root word, it's the exact same vowels as well. All those random little dots, those are your vowels because they had to do this in the most complicated way possible. The point of all this, right, is that God is being very clear here that, okay, right, I gave you this name and I said, you're going to be my people and I'm going to be your God. And here's my covenant. And as we've already said, regardless of whether or not this is supposed to be literal, that this man actually married a prostitute or not, the message is Israel is the one who's a prostitute. Israel is the one who's committing harlotry, and Israel is the one who's departing from the Lord. And so I gave you this covenant with this name, and you were supposed to be my people, and I was supposed to be your God, and you broke that. And because of that, now, lo ami, you are not my people. Lo Ruhama, I will not have mercy on you. And Jezreel, which is basically, I'm going to end your dynasty, and then after that, things are all going, kaput. And so the same name I'm now using to say, all right, like, y'all broke the covenant and y'all broke it bad. And, right, it's very strong language, not my people. This is also a quote, and it is a little long, but it says, apparently the Masoretes as well recognized this is not simply the verb I will be, but it is a repetition of the divine name revealed to Moses in Exodus chapter 3. Rather than using Yahweh, like I talked about, he specifically points back to this word. He writes that this name, Aye or Iye, however you pronounce that, he points out that God himself reverts back to this form of the name, hearkening back to the original use of it in Exodus 3:14. Why? Because the first person form, that form of the name of God, was associated with the initiation of the covenant. So Yahweh was withdrawing the very covenant that he introduced via the revelation of his name, and is using the same form of that name to do it. And so there's actually 4 symbolic names. There's Jezreel, walking sermon illustration. There's Lo Ruhama, walking sermon illustration. And there's Lo Ami, walking sermon illustration. But there's also this, which also serves a purpose of remember when I gave you this name, and remember, you know, if you do this, I will bless you. If you don't do this, I will curse you. You know, all of these, you know, blessings that I was going to give out if you would obey me. Well, now I'm calling you not my people, and now I'm saying I will not have mercy on you. And he's using the exact same form of his name to do so. And I think that is significant. So anyway, that was a lot, I know, and I guarantee it will not be this complicated going forward for the next 14 chapters. But I mean, that is just the nature of Hosea and the nature of starting a brand new book. But anyway, any questions about that? Okay,
probably better not.
we're all so confused. We don't know how to formulate questions. All right. Hand it over to Lester. I guess I could have just scooted down the chair. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, but when I sit in these at these tables, I feel like I'm sitting on the floor. Okay, come to our prayer time. We'll share our prayer requests, and I've got some new ones or some updates on some of these. So we'll share those and add any new ones that we might have. Kent Jensen said his daughter's, doing real well, and she's looking at the last chemo treatment and then surgery after that next month sometime. Nicholas O'Connor, we just kind of need to keep him in our prayers, and Alan Roberts' family. The jail ministry last night and today both went real well. Today we only had two groups today, but we only got one person in that one group, and he's one of the those that's a very strong leader back in the pod where he's at. And they've got some more remodeling going on over there, and that's why things have been different, I guess. So just continue to pray for the jail ministry, for the ladies and for the men. Rebecca Wilson, that's still where all that's at, just her cancer treatments, and Rita Wilson with her kidney situation there. And then I'll probably take Clementine off there. I haven't heard any more, but I think things are okay there now. And just continue to pray for Joe Higgins, and I'm not sure what the doctors have told him since they did those other tests on him. Frank Evans, the last I talked to him, he was doing okay, but he's really been through it. Like 2 or 3 months' time, amputated some off of both legs, and then I found out that he had 2 or 3 fingers off of each hand, both hands. And so just continue to pray for him. That would be a difficult thing, especially at his age, to adjust to. My brother was on there, and night before last, he went to the grocery store. It was about 30 miles from where he lives, and it was very cold up there too. And someone found him laid out in the parking lot, and they said he was unconscious, but one of his daughters told me that he was just out of it. He wasn't really unconscious, but and when they came, the ambulance came and picked him up and all that, and he kind of roused around a little bit. He became very combative, so they had to restrain him and things like that. And I think it's possibly because he wasn't taking some of the medicine that he needs to take. But anyway, the update on that, I can give one here real quick. His one daughter sent me an update just a while ago. She said he is medically cleared now. Everything's kind of back to normal and okay, but they have him classified as someone who is at high risk for falls, and so they're talking about sending people out to the house to do physical therapy, and they still don't know what caused all of that, but just keep him in your prayers. His name is Dennis. And then Destiny, had that ear surgery yesterday, and it was very involved. And like the doctor said, I said that earlier, that doctor said there's no way he could have done that on her ears without putting her to sleep, giving her anesthetic. It was pretty rough.
Is she doing okay now?
She is, yeah. She was. She's supposed to be back to school here tomorrow, is what they said. So I think so.
What was the point of the surgery?
Well, it was her ears, and it was maybe kind of like you had, that clogged ear and stuff and everything.
Oh, okay.
And that plus they were going to replace the tubes in her ears, but with all that they had to do, they decided to put that off for another time.
Okay.
So they did not put new tubes in her ear, in that ear, because it was such a difficult situation.
That
So
might have a lot to do with her speech.
I'm sure it probably would.
I think so.
Yeah. So just continue to pray for Destiny, and then Israel and Gaza, and Ukraine and Russia, and then Pastor Oleg there. Keep all those in our prayers. And LaDonna Hicks, that's an ongoing. And unspoken, do we have any new unspoken tonight? Anybody? Then Jax Crabb with fifth grader with leukemia, and Cindy Hubbard. They're doing pretty good for the time right now. And then Bob Theall asked us to continue to pray for his family's granddaughter and her children, great grandchildren. So keep them in our prayers. And Kathy Williams is looking at knee surgery on the 12th of April. Dropping gym ridings and lower ridings were still about the same. They still need our prayers. Then Janet Coates, I think there was an update on hers too, which was some of it was, I forget, he does his in Messenger. But the hematology doctors, that's the blood, they're waiting on the infectious disease control to consult with them. So something's going on there with her blood. And the antibiotics she is taking for her pneumonia could affect her methotrexate, which is the chemo that she's doing. And so they're wanting a different one if they can possibly do all that. But things are kind of okay since then, but still a lot going on. And he will be, they will have to stay up there in Minnesota maybe 2 or 3 more months instead of the first 28 days they were originally going to. So just keep them in our prayers. Leslie Ames and family. Karen Ritchie, I finally got a hold of Judy. And they took her over to the place. She was enthralled with it, but she didn't realize she was going to have to stay. But she did, and she kind of objected a little bit, but she's kind of doing okay with it now, I guess, with the change maybe coming along. So just keep her in our prayers. And the place she's in is over by Bailey Medical. It's called Oxford something or another. And if you know her, want to go visit her, that would probably be a good thing. Cheryl Clark is still not back to work yet, but she had that burst appendix last week and is doing better and okay, but she's still trying to recover at home. And Adam Peters is doing somewhat okay. He's they're trying to get him a place in Bartlesville, but he may be coming down to stay somewhere in Nowat at least for a while until some more transition stuff takes place. Pray for Erlene Mitchell, and then Laura Allen.
I think you can take Laura off. She's doing really well.
Okay.
But back here on this first line of people, her brother-in-law, David Mathewson, I've been asking.
Oh, yeah,
her,
yeah.
He passed away last week from that cancer.
Oh, okay.
He had a really hard time the last few weeks. And I didn't know it, or I would have asked again, but she says so.
A new one here is Roseanne Anderson. Her maiden name was Roseanne Moore. I remember when she was born. The church that Paul and I grew up in, her father was one of the main deacons at Bellevue Baptist Church there in Tulsa, and she was born to them late in life. Her oldest brother is my age, and she's probably in her 40s or something like that. But they diagnosed her day before yesterday with colon cancer. So pray, keep her in our prayers, and until we see what goes on and happens there. And then I want to add Landon Smith. That's Parker's brother. Pray for him while he's in missions, and he said about another week, and he may start language.
Oh, I didn't say I know when he would start, but he is like he's all set, like he's registered for language school, and I think what I said was last week he started. They were giving out Bibles, like they have like a table set up somewhere. They would give out Bibles.
Oh, okay.
And he's in Germany, isn't he?
Germany, yeah. You know the name of the city or town where he's near? We'll find out and let us know.
To be determined whenever I remember.
Ask him that way. He might be in a real good, real good place. Excuse me. And then Noah, that's Bob Martin's grandson, one of those that we baptized. You know, he'd been sick and they hadn't been here in a while. And come to find out the other day that he had, from being sick, he had to go into the hospital for a while. And I think it has to do with his breathing and stuff. So that's one thing that's kind of kept them on that path. They do watch on our Facebook page, so but keep him in our prayers. Noah. Anyone else? Any others?
Keep my brother, son-in-law, RJ. He had a CT scan or something Monday to check to see if the cancer is still out of his bones.
Okay, that's Kitterman, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, RJ Kitterman. Keep him in our prayers.
And they haven't heard any results yet.
Okay.
And it goes back first.
Anyone else? Any others? Well, if not, remember this Sunday is Resurrection Sunday. I don't like to use the word Easter that much, but Resurrection Sunday, and we will be taking the Lord's Supper. And just kind of give a heads up, we're not going to use those little cups that you can't open up. We're going back to the traditional way of doing that, because several people evidently, not I was one of them.
I can't get the thing open.
Yeah, you can't separate that plastic to open it up and do that. Well, you'd think they'd fix that, but maybe I'm the only one that has trouble with it. I don't know.
If you wanted to go like real traditional, we'd do it the Thursday before, and we would all drink out of the same cup.
Oh yeah,
Not during flu season.
the Catholic Church still does that.
Yeah. Well, which one is it that like you're not like only the priest takes? Is it the cup?
Well, I went to one Catholic funeral, and everybody that wanted to could do that. And so there's, I guess, a branch of Catholic Church that does that, where people take the wafer and then the priest drinks the wine. So
They just had 12 people drinking out of the same cup.
Do what?
They just had 12 people drinking out of the same
yeah,
Yeah.
now you have a whole congregation.
Well, but I mean, if you think about it, I mean, you know, if you would have had, you know, I mean, you're talking about the Last Supper, obviously, but like, you know, if you were just like a regular Jewish family and you got you, your wife, and your kids, and their kids, and all their in-laws, and all that, I mean, yeah, you'd have a church full of people drinking out the same cup, you know. I mean,
I remember when I was a little kid at my grandmother's, they had a bucket sitting on the cabinet and a dipper in the bucket. And everybody used the dipper.
Yeah.
I never liked to do that.
No, but they did.
Back in the day, they did.
It was
Yeah.
kid or adult, and of course they hauled their water.
Yeah,
I remember at my aunt's, we
Different.
draw water out of the well.
they did all that. Okay, well, let's pray then, and meet back on Sunday morning, and we'll not have evenings Bible study Sunday evening because it's Easter holiday, Resurrection Day holiday. So let's pray as we close this evening. Our Heavenly Father, we're thankful and grateful as we've come and been here this evening for this time of study together, and we just stop to think about, Father, how a great a message that we find in this book of Hosea, and we just understand, Father, that in the things that we read about and hear about here, that they seem strange and unusual to us, but they have a purpose and a meaning that will be glorifying to you. And so we ask, Father, that we might grasp a hold of that, and Lord, just keep that in our hearts. So we just understand that you're a God of grace and mercy, but you're also a God who is holy and righteous and pure. And we just come and apply this to our own lives and how we live our lives before you. And we ask, Father, that you would touch the hearts and lives of each of these that we have called out their names tonight. And as you work in the midst of their need, Father, that they would stop and realize that you're the author of life, and you're the giver of life. You're the giver of strength, and you're the giver of healing and helping people through their needs and their burdens and their problems, as well as their sicknesses and their diseases. And so we just pray, Father, as you work in each person's life, that you're glorified and magnified in it all. And Lord, that we would be edified by the things that we see and hear, and the testimonies that come to people who know you, love you, and trust you, and those that we lift up before you, that you may, as you work in their life, we may recognize your presence in their need in their life. And we ask, Father, now you'll bless us as we go and bring us back again on Sunday. And we do pray and ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.